Velkommen alle sammen. Welcome back to the series where we look at what the Norse gods and deities actually represent. And today we're speaking about Siv. I touched on Siv in my last video that I did about Siv's hair as one of the gifts from the dwarves that the gods got early on in the mythology. But in this video we are solely focused on Siv and what she represents. Thor's wife, the earth goddess. Translation first as usual. I already went into this in the other video, but Siv basically means connection by marriage. We see cognates of this word in other Germanic languages actually, and it's a word found more often in law codes, really. It's not just a word for a bride, it's a word for any connection by marriage in general. It could be like in-laws, stepdaughters, anything like that. That's what Siv's name means. On to the attestations. I spoke about some of these in the last video, but this is going to go into a bit more depth. First attestation comes in Heidebard's the story of Thor and Heidebard, which is Odin in disguise, and they're doing their little rap battle, flyting as it was called in Old Norse. And Odin implies that Thor's wife is still at home, cheating on him with another man. And Thor says, no, that's bullshit, my wife is faithful. So that is Heidebard's Then we have Lokasen, where Siv comes up. We have a similar situation where this poem is the most hilarious in the whole Old Norse category of texts. It's maybe the most hilarious poem of all time, and that's just when Loki is drunk and talking shit to all the gods at a big feast, insulting each of them one by one, just roasting all of them. And Siv gets up and pours Loki a drink. And she says, oh Loki, you're so mean to everyone else, but of all the acid, you have to admit that I am the only one that nothing bad can be said about. So Loki drinks up his mead, burps, wipes that shit off his beard and says, but you would be, Siv, if that were actually true. You cheated on Thor, you dirty bitch. You cheated on with me. So again, we have rumors of the skanky nasty Siv cheating on her poor husband Thor, but Thor wasn't exactly loyal either. He had a few mistresses, but I'll tell you what all that means in a minute. That's all the mentions we have in the Poetic Edda. We have a couple of brief mentions of her used as a kending for Thor, which you can see here. So on to the later on in time composed Prose Edda. Just be aware that this was written by a Christian a couple hundred years after pagan times and can't be trusted 100% as reflecting original pagan belief. First, in the prologue section, Siv is mentioned as the wife of Thor and that she was known as a Sibyl in ancient times, but we don't know her as Siv at that time. This is a new name for her. And she's also the loveliest woman with golden hair, and also that her and Thor banged and produced a son named Loithi. Next section in Gylfangning, it mentions that Siv has another son called Ullr, but Thor is not the father. Could be Loki, don't know. The father is not mentioned here. There's no telling how many cocks Siv has taken. Anyway, in Skaldskapamal section, she comes up again when Thor battles the giant Hrungnir, and the giant says that he will kill all the gods, but he will keep Siv and Freya for himself. Thor gets mad and says, fuck you, you're not taking my wife, and Thor quickly kills the giant. But Siv was always known as the Jotun's desire. She was the desire of all the giants. She pops up again in Skaldskapamal, and this is the story that we all know when Loki cuts off Siv's hair as a prank. Then Thor gets pissed off and Loki agrees to go to the dwarves and have them make brand new headpiece of golden hair for Siv to use. Also, she is listed in many kendings, the Old Norse poetical metaphor talk. She is a wife of Thor, mother of Ullr, and a couple of other things like you see here. It also mentions that Thrudir, who is a daughter of Thor and Siv, so it appears Thor and Siv had at least 2 kids together. Then finally, in this section, Siv is listed here as Heiti, as they're called, which is a metaphor. She's listed as Heiti for earth. So when this happens, that a god is listed as a metaphor here, it makes this very easy for us because that's exactly what the god usually represents. But interestingly enough, Thor's mother is the earth. Her name is Jord, which directly means earth. So what Siv represents is a certain aspect of earth instead of the whole world as a whole. Now this is where we get on into the theories. There is only one that all the scholars agree upon. It's pretty clear Siv is the earth goddess. She's a heithen for earth, so she represents the earth. But like I said, not the planet as a whole. Think of earth like in the sense of soils, field, fertile land. That is what Siv represents, the earth, like the soil. And of course her hair represents the golden fields of wheat, which I spoke about in the last video, but here we're getting a little bit deeper into the other attestations and trying to explain those. Let's start with her being the whore of a wife of Thor. Now this is a long story, but Thor represents generally in the myth the life force, not just in humans but all living things. He's also the storm god that brings electricity and rain. When you combine that with Siv, aka the earth, soil, land, that's when things start to grow. So Thor represents the life force in our human bodies, in our myths, but also he represents the life force in everything, in the world as a whole. He's pumping his life force into the earth. That's when the storm and the rain comes. That's thunder. That actually does seem like ancient humans believed this storm to be kind of the cosmos, the universe, pumping that life force into the earth. We know that ancient humans had some knowledge of electricity and electrical signals in our own body. Thor's hammer Mjolnir is the driving power of Thor, and that represents our heart, or heartbeat, and just like that pumps life into our bodies. Thor swings his hammer during a storm and pumps life force into the earth. The earth is Siv, and that is when things come to grow. So where does Loki come into all this? Loki is the force in nature that instigates change. Snorri said this himself in the Prose Edda, that he is the mover of stories, so we know this one is pretty clear that's what Loki represents. We don't really have an English word for this, or maybe any modern understanding of this idea, but catalyst or instigator is the closest thing we have to what Loki represents. Loki is just some sort of force in the universe that brings any kind of significant change. So Thor, aka the storm and life force, gets pumped into earth and bringing things, plants and trees and everything to life. But Loki is the catalytic force that is also needed to bring change. So Thor gets to bang Siv and make things grow on the regular like a husband does, but Loki is the milkman popping in once a month just to get things rolling. That's why Loki almost always pops up in the myths with Thor more than any other god. Especially any myth that has to do with death and birth. It's because Loki is the energy in the universe that instigates this change. But Loki's a long subject for another video. Let's get back to Siv. We can also talk about Hrungnir, how this giant said he wanted to kill all the gods but keep Siv and Freya for himself. So remember, the word for giant in Old Norse was Jotun, and it doesn't even mean giants. It's a bad translation. Jotun means devourer. The giants are the devouring forces in nature. Things like old age, plague, famine, catastrophe, decomposition, drought, things like that. So Hrungnir, long story, but scholars think he represents some sort of serious natural disaster that destroys the Aesir and everything, but he wants to keep Siv and Freya alive. Why? Because Siv represents earth, or fertile land. Freya represents the egg in humans or nature, so basically the feminine creative forces of nature. Without Siv and Freya, nothing would grow, everything would cease to exist. It would be just rocks and soil in the world, so which is not good for the giants either, because they need something there to devour as well. They need some things to be alive, but all of this is not possible without Thor anyway, because he is the life force. That's why Thor was able to beat Hrungnir so easily, even though he was the most powerful giant of all. Especially in other stories, Thor struggles to beat a lot weaker giants, but he disposes of Hrungnir easily. So the story of Hrungnir probably represents some very ancient type of natural disaster that threatened to wipe out everything on the planet besides soil and seeds. A disaster that thankfully has not happened since, to our knowledge. And this maybe a comet or meteor shower comes to mind from the description of Hrungnir's battle that we see here, but he is a subject for another video as well. Then what else do we have to say about Siv? Let's talk about her children. First is the two children with Thor, Thrudr and Loridi. Thrudr is Thor and Siv's daughter. That's pretty easy. Her name means strength, power, energy. And you can see clearly what this is. It's the energy stored in the earth. The earth gives energy, which is transferred to plants and things living, and even into us and other creatures. We get energy from the earth. Then we have Thor and Siv's other son, Loridi. We don't really know anything about Loridi. We don't even have a clear translation of the name, so there's not much that we can say about Thor and Siv's son, but it would be some sort of thing generated by the earth, comparable to this energy. Let me know if you guys have any ideas about that. I really don't have any. But then we have Ullr. We don't know who the father of Ullr is, but this is a son of Siv. We don't know a whole lot about him either, but he is the god of skis and archery and winter. His home is Idalr, meaning Yew Valley. So this is very cool because the Norse only had two sacred trees, the yew tree and the björk träd. I don't know the English word for it, but I'll put it up here. It's bjarkan. Remember, these were two runes that were in the Elder and Younger Futhark. The only two runes that were trees was Yr and bjarkan. So these are two trees that were extremely sacred in the Norse and Germanic world. Yew trees, they were what was used for weapons, bows, skis, spears, axes, sometimes staves and things like that, other weapons. And these are some of the things that Ullr was associated with. It's also mentioned in the sources that Ullr was a good god to pray to for success in single combat, so it definitely seems like Ullr is some sort of spiritual entity that it was born of the earth, just like he is Siv's son, the son of the earth goddess, and maybe he resided mainly in the sacred yew tree, where humans could use for their tools and harness some of the spiritual energy. Again, it makes sense that he's the son of the earth goddess Siv, and Ullr is probably a very important subject, but he seems to be some sort of spiritual entity that lives in the woods, or specifically the yew tree, but that's a subject for another video. Anyway, that's all we have to say about Siv. Let me know what you guys think. Did I miss anything? Also that she's the rival of Jarnsaksa, the giantess that Thor banged and had 2 kids with. So yeah, that makes sense too, that she's the rival of Jarnsaksa. Siv is a skank, but Thor isn't any better. But as you know, our myths are symbolic. Yes, the gods are real spiritual entities that we believe in. As you have seen in this video, they are some sort of power and energy that can be stored in the earth or trees or other things like that, which also a lot of it agrees with modern science most of the time, and it all comes back to this idea of animism, this idea that spiritual energy is everywhere, all around us. So let me know what you guys think. If you have any theories about Siv, well, that's all I have to say for today. Vi ses nästa gång.